Why are you buying a house? To flex on your cousins? I look at home buying as part of the financial planning process.
Okay.
I think there's the opportunities, there's the risks. Third element that's not talked enough about, money feelings and money emotions.
How much time should you spend doing financial planning?
We're not taught finance, and people are spending without thinking about the ramifications and consequences. One of the best things you can do to set yourself up for success, know what are the principles and what are the frameworks that you can work within.
Would you ever advise anyone to never buy a home?
It's not about will they never buy, it's will they be able to buy. When you look into a home purchase, one of the questions you also want to ask is how will this affect the rest of your life? No matter how much money you make, if you're not saving it, you'll still end up with nothing.
Yeah, that was too deep. Financial planning to purchase your first real estate home. Super important. Today we're going to figure out how to do it here with Enoch. He's been a financial planner / advisor for about a decade now. And then you're going to tell me, well, I don't know if it's me. I would say this is actually more applicable to someone a little bit younger. Because I remember back then when I started content creation and I was doing quite well, a few financial advisors reached out to me. They're like, okay, I want to work with you.
Right.
And then they said, I want to work with you while you're like, just fresh because I want to build with you. And then I'm like, okay. And then they're like, you need minimum $300,000 to start. I'm like, okay, is this starting fresh? So I think financial planning and advising is not accessible enough for the people who are younger. But they need to start early if they want to build their money to buy a home, right? So yeah, tell me about it. How do I do it?
Oh, wow. Where do we start? I think when I think about financial planning, there's a few parts I like to break it down. I think there's the opportunities that are ahead of you. How do you save on taxes? How do you grow your wealth? There's the risks. What happens if you lose your job? What happens if someone gets diagnosed with cancer? How do you mitigate those risks? And I think there's a third element that's not talked enough about, which is what our firm is trying to unpack. Really, it's money psychology, money feelings and money emotions, as in what was it like growing up with or without money, right? Did you see your parents go through things? What have you learned from both your culture, from society? And what does it look like when we're now in an age where information is at our disposal? Just go to ChatGPT, get all the information you need, Google whatever you want. But then with all this information, the question is, what's credible or not? Where do you start?
Okay. Well, before we talk about where you start, let's talk about what is the information we're talking to? Who is this information most valuable towards? Is it? I mean, how much time should you spend doing financial planning to buy a home? What is the time range?
Right. And so for me, I look at home buying as part of the financial planning process. And so it is probably one of the most pivotal moves someone can make in their life, especially in the early stages. But I also look at it in consideration of, is this person single? Are they married? Do they have kids? What does it look like for them? Do they want to take care of their parents? Are they have plans to retire? Do they run a business? Are they running a charity? What other goals and values do they have? So are they someone that really likes to be generous? Are they someone that really likes travel? And so I think when you look into a home purchase, one of the questions you also want to ask is, how will this affect the rest of your life and the other parts of your life?
Well, I think a lot of the people who already have money probably already have a financial advisor, right? Right now, I want to solve this problem for people who are early and don't have the money but need this information because a lot of the banks financial advising for people who are 20 is not great. I don't think it's great. So let's say someone who's more fresh, they're maybe 22 still in school, or maybe 20, 22 or 24, maybe in school, freshly graduated or been working for a little bit. When should they start doing the planning?
Right. Yeah, so that's a great question. I think when you're in the early stage, one of the best things you can do to set yourself up for success is to know what are the principles and what are the frameworks that you can work within. So for example, budgeting, cash flow, right? Budgeting is always seen as a negative thing, or it can be scary.
Well, why is it a negative thing?
It can be seen as a negative thing because I think for a lot of our clients, they just don't know where to start. It's overwhelming. They're thinking about, it's limiting. If I have to think about a budget, it means I have to say no to stuff.
I've never experienced that in my life. I've always budgeted. This is a common thing? Budgeting?
That's quite common. A lot of people are afraid to look at their bank accounts, and the statistics show that a lot of people, I would say more than the majority of people in Canada, are one paycheck away from bankruptcy.
What do you mean? What does bankruptcy mean?
Bankruptcy means
not
that
paying their rent?
As in, it could be paying rent, mortgage payments, but basically, if they were to lose their job, the question we want to ask is how much or how long can you last until your money goes out?
And
for a lot of Canadians, it's just a few months of runway. That's all they have.
And that happens because of their lack of budgeting?
It's a mixture of, it could be Vancouver is a very high cost city comparatively. It could be that they weren't taught. It could be that they didn't know proper budgeting, or a lot of it is ignorance. It's not their fault, but we're not taught finance. We're not taught financial literacy in our schools. And when they do work, let's say with a bank teller, or let's say you're online looking for news, you kind of get piecemeal things. And so you're implementing without knowing the bigger picture. And so one of the biggest things that people can do for themselves starting out is to be aware of the numbers. So
it's very interesting. I guess it doesn't matter how little you make. You just have to live not above your means, which is probably a lot of people who aren't looking at their bank account or their budgets are living above their means.
Yes, definitely. So one of the cardinal rules is don't spend more than you earn. It's simply put, it's quick math.
It's very interesting. And people get into credit card debt, which I don't, but people get into it because of what? They just don't look at it? Or
so we're at a point where, for example, when I was at school and university, I would see credit card companies popping up and getting students to sign up for credit cards. And I always thought, people are signing up for credit cards. I wonder if they actually know what credit is, how to utilize it. Versus, no one's teaching them about savings or setting an emergency fund. No one's teaching them about, for example, how to save for a house. Versus now you got credit cards. Now we're going to talk about the bonuses, travel hacks, and people are spending without thinking about the ramifications or consequences of excessive spending.
Why is there not enough education about that in high school or high school is a good place to learn, but there is no money education in high school.
Not a lot. There's some schools that have some curriculum or introduced it. Overall, I mean, this is a larger conversation about our education systems and kind of what it looks like, and does the role depend on the government or ourselves? Well, I think that's one of the things that I'm so invested in, and I know you yourself as well with education. So over the past few years, we've launched a number of courses and educational resources, and we've worked with a number of universities to deliver content. Because at the end of the day, I think this is something that everyone needs to know. And the more knowledge they have, the more empowered they are.
Okay, let's talk about budgeting in a super simple form before we move on. Let's say for the average person who just graduated is making average salaries, maybe 60,000 for fresh grads?
Sure. Let's throw out a number. Let's say 60,000.
What percentage of their money should they be budgeting? So after taxes, that's how much? 45,000 ish?
Give and take.
Okay. Yeah. So with that $45,000, how do they spend their money? Assuming they have to live by themselves.
So each case is different, but overall you can use different frameworks. For example, a very popular one is the 50-30-20 principle. So that's 50% into needs, 30% into wants, and 20% into savings and investments. So that's one way you can look at it. How I look at it is it's the principle of how do you pay yourself first. So basically, how I do it when I work with a lot of younger clients is the moment that paycheck goes in, automatically take percentages off. So let's say your paycheck is $2,000. So let's say you take 10% of that $200, you put it aside into savings account or investments account. You take another 200%, and for me, I really like giving to charity. So I say, hey, challenge you to give. Maybe it's $50, $20. Give to a charity, put it aside. And so you're basically, what you're doing is you're labeling the money. So instead of having all the money sitting there, where a lot of people are tempted to say, hey, I've got all this money there, I can spend whatever I want. You're giving power to yourself by labeling it, by saying, I'm going to put a meaning towards this amount, and then you can set it up for success.
Think about 20% aside on a 45,000 in your pocket money. That's only 8,000, 9,000. Around 10,000 a year. Actually, that's not bad, but it's definitely not enough to buy a home, even if you do that for 10 years. So
how do you get there? So how do you bridge the gap, right?
And
that's one of the harsh realities, is that with Vancouver, we've seen housing prices increase dramatically. And it's getting harder and harder too. And so really, when you look at it as simple math, there's two things: either save more, spend less, or increase your income. Or maybe you end up with a windfall. A lot of clients, they might have parents that help them out with inheritance. A lot of business owners start businesses, and then they're able to magnify their profits through that. And so I would say it starts first, though, no matter how much money you make, if you're not saving it, you still end up with nothing, right? So these are principles that anyone can build, even if you're not at a high income bracket. And then as you build, as you continue to increase your income potential, as you're continuing to amass your wealth, that's where those very same principles from the beginning will carry you forward.
I remember when I was younger, I was the principle I followed was maybe like 10% needs, 90% savings. Even now, actually, my so I obviously have a paycheck from my own businesses, right?
Right.
But when I take that paycheck, it's like 90% of it just goes into investments. Well, but I'm also lucky because my life is funded by being a content creator. I have a pretty free life, so 90% of my paycheck goes to investments.
Right.
But not everyone can do that. Do you think more people should be like saving that aggressively?
I would say it's a balancing act. I think if people have the opportunity, definitely being able to increase your savings and investments is wonderful. But I think it all comes down to what are people's values? What's important to them? What are their priorities? Right? For example, let's say you have a client that is expecting their third child, right? And so they're really focused on how do we protect the family, how do you make sure that the children have the right education, how do you take care of your spouse, and so they might be saving less because they have a lot of urgent needs and priorities. But let's say maybe someone else, that doesn't have kids, and let's say dual income, no kids,
right?
And so maybe they're able to aggressively save and invest more during this time. And so I look at it as both timing, priority, and seeing what makes sense. And so let's say certain business owners are able to have a lot of wealth. So now there's different strategies about wealth accumulation and estate planning. And so I will look at each person individually different, but it's all about the alignment between who they are and where they want to be.
Yeah. Well, it gets complicated when everyone's a case-by-case scenario. Is there no like average good practice that you just like do it?
I mean, there is. It's like, for me, the principles I live by is live within your means, give generously, and all these different principles I live by are universal. They're ancient wisdom passed through time.
Okay.
Right. I know that's kind of sounds fluffy, but it's when you really look at it, there's principles and frameworks. But there really is no one-size solution that fits all because each person is different.
Right.
Whether you're a first-time buyer, seasoned investor, or ready to sell, Prompton Real Estate Services is your go-to partner in Vancouver. Their market knowledge, personalized service, and commitment to success set them apart. Take the next step with confidence. Visit Prompton.com and let Prompton Real Estate Services help you achieve your real estate goals.
Yeah, so I would say as kind of some next steps for people that are starting out, whether you're early in your career or you're figuring out home buying for the first time, it's to arm yourself with knowledge. So a few areas you can look into is one, what does it look like in the area of budgeting and cash flow? What does it look like to really know what's coming in, what's coming out? What does it look like to have good, solid saving strategies, or even just how to get into the habit of savings? Another thing to look into is what opportunities you have. So, for example, there's the Registered Retirement Savings Plan, RSP, there's the TFSA, there's the FHSA. What does that look like? How to utilize tax saving strategies? We can look into what are the actual costs of buying a house, everything from property transfer taxes to what does it actually look like to save towards. So having these numbers in mind.
I'm going to stop you on the tax part here. This is super interesting. So at what point in our tax brackets do you think it becomes really essential that we're worrying about like tax programs?
And tax programs being
like RSP or I guess TFSA you should always be investing in. But is there a certain amount where like we're paying 20%, 30% tax and it's like, okay, I really need to start thinking about the tax thing?
Right. I would say even from the very beginning. So even knowing what an RSP is, knowing what the tax brackets are, can help influence your decisions. So not everyone should utilize it at the same time because it's about timing, but knowing what it is can help with that decision. So a good strategy for me to always ask people is, do you need this money now or later?
Okay.
And then that also influences where you should put it. And do you want to lock it away somewhere or do you want to keep it fluid?
Okay. Let's talk about these programs right now. So there's the RSP, there's the TFSA, there's the FHSA now. What else are we missing? RSP is a retirement.
Yeah, Registered Retirement Savings Plan.
And that does what?
And so what it is it's a registered account. So I'll explain the differences with these two. A TFSA and an RSP, what's the main difference between the two?
Okay.
And for me, it's about the timing. So with an RSP, when you contribute towards it, what happens is, let's say you made 100K this year. You want to put 20K into the RSP. So you deposit 20K in. What it does is it reduces your taxable income from 100K to 80K.
Right.
So whatever taxes you would have paid at 100K, you now pay at the 80K mark. And what the difference is that in Canada, we have a tiered tax system.
Right.
So the more you earn, it might bump you up into different tax brackets. So for example, if you're making 100 grand, your taxes are going to be a lot higher than if you're only making 40 grand.
Right.
And so the more higher your income is, the more important it is to know what the tax brackets are, because you might be paying a lot more in taxes. And so each deduction in terms of your taxable income is a lot greater the more money you're making.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to have a simple way to explain what RSP is, but it's pretty much like managing your tax bracket. Or yeah, it's hard to explain.
It's like usually you can search everything online. Usually when I explain it, I'll have visuals or I'll even have puppets.
Yeah.
I have a whole puppet show on it.
TFSA is simple, tax-free investing.
Yeah. So so the key difference between this two is that with an RSP, you get an immediate tax reduction or tax savings. However, when you pull the money out later on,
then you get taxed.
Then. With the TFSA, it's the reverse.
Yeah,
so when you put money in, it's money that's already been taxed. There's no tax deductions. When you pull the money, when you pull the money out, it is tax free. Yeah, because you've already been taxed in the beginning.
And now there's new ones like the FHSA.
FHSA is actually it's the golden child. It's the best of both.
Oh yeah, it has the RSP but the downside is it only applies to, well, actually wait, this is what we're talking about. It applies to home purchasing, but the downside is the amount is so low, right? You get 8,000 per year.
8,000 per year.
There's a cap of not a lot, I remember.
Yeah.
What's the point?
So it's if you look at let's say across Canada, we live in Vancouver, which is definitely a more expensive city.
FHSA's first
home savings account.
Okay.
Yeah, and so what it is, it's got the best properties of RSP and a TFSA. So when you contribute towards it, it lowers your taxable income. When you withdraw it, it's tax free for the purpose of buying your first home.
Right.
Because the amount is quite low. It's more of like a nice to have for, let's say, for a lot of purchases in Vancouver. Let's say maybe you're living out towards the...
Maybe more of like a emotional incentive too. It's like, I have this, I should use it to buy something, right?
Yeah, it could be. I think it's still a good tool. It might not be enough for all of it, but at least it's for some of it. Yeah. And it does encourage people to get into the habit of saving.
Right. It's because I was talking to this about someone else, like
a
city needs more people who own their homes to have people who stay in a city and have a strong workforce. And so that's why programs like these are important, because they want people to purchase their first home. Yeah. Have you heard of that?
I think homeownership is such a tricky piece because there's a supply and demand equation, right? And so right now, a lot of the clients I'm working with, so I have a whole range of clients from ultra high net worth to those that are living in poverty trying to get out. And there's a whole socioeconomic spectrum, but the tough part is that a lot of the clients I'm working with are finding it very difficult to survive. They're finding, food costs are going up, mortgage costs were rising, now they're slightly lowering, but it's expensive to live. And for a lot of people, it's hard to even get into the market because housing prices have doubled or tripled since then. And so there's kind of that conversation. And then there's those that got in earlier, or maybe those that have been blessed with more wealth, and so they're able to get into it at this point. And so I think for me, it's really important to understand people's realities. And understanding, like, for example, for some, they've got $3 million in the bank, now they're looking at different options. So it's a lot easier, let's say, to plan investment strategies or figure out their timing, versus someone that's making, combined family income of $150K, got 2 kids, and it's hard for them to even figure out rent versus buying a place.
Well, would you ever advise anyone to never buy a home? Does it ever, in any circumstance, make sense to just never buy a house and only rent in Vancouver?
I would say I would switch the question around. It's not about will they never buy, it's will they be able to buy.
Okay.
And so if you look at the numbers, some people might not be able to ever buy because they don't have the earning potential or the ability to save. And so then it's not about should they never buy,
So it's always, if possible, better to buy. There's never
it's better to buy if it fits their goals and there's a purpose and meaning behind it.
Right.
And so that's why I always go back to what's the purpose behind it? What's the purpose-driven goal?
Right.
And so real estate is great, right? A lot of people think a lot of different things about it, but it can be a great investment tool, right? It can be a great place for stability to have your family. And, for example, my family, we were renting before. And then we got evicted one time when my brothers went through cancer. So I know what it's like to live in financial circumstances that are tough, and also what it's like to worry about housing, and then when we had a property, it's like, great, we were able to not worry about being kicked out of the house for renting, finding the next landlord, but now we have different problems. Now we got to deal with property tax and, dealing with the maintenance, which is a nice problem,
right.
But there's always the pros and cons to each. And so I would say for people, really just calculate it for yourself.
Right.
Like, what's the risk to reward for you, and does it align to your goals?
For myself, or not myself, but let's say someone who wanted to just never buy it. Because I've been seeing TikTok videos recently of people comparing how much it costs to rent versus how much it costs to own a home. And homeownership is oftentimes much more expensive than renting. And then you calculate the period of time you're paying money. And it's like, is it better to just take the rent and then take that additional money and put it elsewhere? Or is it better to own a home?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And when you really break it down, so let's say, for example, that TikTok video might be just talking about cash flow itself, as in if you look into all the money you put towards a house, let's say fixing the roof, getting a new boiler, fixing the walls, etc., versus just paying rent straight up. Well, when you pay rent, you don't have to worry about a lot of these things because the landlord will take care of it. But the thing is that the owner of the house has something that the renter does not have, which is appreciation of a house. Home equity. And so even though they might have spent more to upkeep the house, over time, that house would have accumulated more value. So then it's a calculation of, well, with the money that renter saved, if they were to put it in investments, would it grow to be as much as, let's say, owning a house? And so in certain years, it's better to own a house. In certain years, it's better to own stocks, right? So also depending on what you invest in. So that calculation, I would say, it's never as black or white.
Well, what's the risk tolerance for both of these types of investments? Is it riskier to buy the house, or is it riskier to rent and invest?
Right. Well, it depends on what you invest, right? So if you invested in Bitcoin, that could have been the best thing ever, especially now, or could have been the worst thing ever with the crashes. What I say with housing, the biggest thing about houses is that your money is basically locked in for a longer time. So let's say if you were to sell a house versus sell a stock, it's a lot easier to sell a stock than to sell a house. And so for a lot of people, there's definitely a higher proportion of people that are house rich, cash poor. I don't know if you've heard of this term.
Okay. No.
Okay. Yeah. So what this means is that, let's say they spent all their money to buy their dream house. They've lived in their house. The majority of their paycheck goes towards paying the mortgage, towards the upkeep. So they don't have a lot of savings. Let's say they need to spend on something, or something happens. Where do they get the money? Well, everything's locked up inside the house. So even though, it's not liquid. So even though on paper they have a $2 million house, that's great. But in their bank accounts, they have almost nothing. And so they can pull from the house, but in this case, they're cash poor.
This is most Asians, right? The house and the car, right?
Well, if we're talking about the Asian demographic, yes, there is, I would say, even stepping a little bit back, what is success? Defining that. And a lot of people define it as, let's say for example, in the Asian community, as being able to have a property, have a car, have material wealth, right? That is an indication of success. Others might say, actually, success is having a good family, having a good job. Others could say it's to be able to bless others through generosity. And so I say, even your idea of success affects how you view finances. And so, for example, with the idea of buying a house or purchasing a house, why? Why are you buying a house? Is it to flex on your cousins? Is it because you have a family that you want to provide for and you need a house because you want them to have stability? And so how you answer that question influences how you view your finances. I know, now we're getting deep here.
That's deep.
But that's how we do it.
Yeah. Should we buy a house? Maybe we shouldn't.
Should we? That's the question.
You're making me think now.
Well, that's the whole part about this.
So, yeah, that was too deep, and I think we need to continue this.
Oh man, we're just scratching the surface here, and so the fun part about this is that the reason why I started my own business, my firm, is because I felt people weren't going deep enough.
Right.
There was a lot of surface level transactions going on, but nobody really took the time to really question, like, why is a goal a goal?
Yeah.
What is the version of success? And for me, I've realized this is that at the end of the day, if I worked with a client for 40, 50 years, the last thing I want them to do is to say, Enoch, we did all this planning, but I realized this is the wrong plan. Or I put my ladder on the wall to climb it up to realize I climbed up the wrong wall. And I think for me, it's unpacking. If somebody can really get to know who they are, align their goals or values to each other, then that really is one of the key pieces that's missing. So I know we're talking about a lot of deep conversations and a lot of stuff, but it's really just scratching the surface as you uncover.
I think at the end of the day, the most important thing, the biggest takeaway I got in terms of this topic is, why are you buying a house? Or why are you buying that certain house that you imagine?
Right, exactly.
You don't want to work your whole life for that thing you didn't really want.
Exactly. And so it's unpacking the why.
Yeah.
And then everything else can fall into place.
Okay, well, we'll keep unpacking next time. Thank you for coming on, Enoch.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
This video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.